All right, I think we're live and recording. Hi, everybody. Hi, Marcus. Thank you so much for allocating time for this Ask Me Anything about onboarding remotely. I'm going to give you the floor just so you can introduce yourself and then also talk about the topic that we will be discussing today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thank you all for joining in here on your Friday. So I'm Marcus, as you probably already all saw. I'm an engineering manager at Buffer. I'm the engineering manager for the mobile team there, and I'm focusing a lot on my side, but also at Buffer on leadership, management in virtual teams, what's important, and yeah, I'll try to collect some of those thoughts sometimes on my blog and in events like this. So yeah, that's who I am, and I'm calling from Munich, Germany right now. We all can't go out, so we're all stuck in our homes. Yeah, and I think the topic today is onboarding, right? A very important topic.
Onboarding remote employees. So Buffer has been one of the, Buffer is one of the pioneers when it comes to distributed teams, and we basically kind of saw the evolution of how teams are when it comes to like you having just 5 members to 25 members and up to how many team members do you have now?
We're currently 90, and I think the last number of countries, I think we have 21 countries.
Right. Okay. And how many time zones?
Oh, I don't want to say all of them. I think 11, 12. We are from like Australia to the West Coast. My team is basically, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people in my team, and we have 6 different time zones.
Oh, okay.
From Taiwan to San Francisco. So that is challenging, yeah.
Right. Okay. So maybe you can take us a little bit of how it was before with Buffer, and then how the process is now when it comes to onboarding.
Yeah. So as I mentioned to you before, I'll talk about all of this from the perspective of a manager. Right now, I'm onboarding someone new, so it's all fresh in my mind. But I'm not in the people team, so I'm not doing all the heavy lifting. I can explain to you what we're doing and how we're using it. But yeah, before I do that, so in the past, some of you might have heard about the Buffer Bootcamp. There's probably also some older articles still out there. So when I joined almost 5 years ago, we still had that. And what that meant is that when you joined, you were basically, I think, 6 weeks on like provision. It's like a period where you're checking out the company if you like it, and the company checks you out if it works out. No limitations. You were still a full employee. No other limitations. What was just called the bootcamp. While that worked okay for some, we noticed that having a word for that and having it especially called bootcamp, which is normally quite a hard thing, it didn't really help with like team cohesion and building a good culture, because the person that went through bootcamp always had the question of like, okay, am I in now, or do I have to wait? Like, am I a part of this team? Am I part of this company? So I don't actually know when, probably a couple of years ago, maybe 3, could be. We decided to not have the bootcamp anymore. There's also an article you can find on our blog. And since then, it's basically doesn't have a name anymore, which helps. It's just a very solid process that we have built and that we can probably go through. Do you want me to go through that like right away?
Yes, if you could walk us through the process.
Yeah, so as soon as we hire someone and we make an offer and that person accepts, we'll basically involve the people team. So the people team gets involved and they start preparing everything. They will send them over a form where they fill out the basic information of like, okay, what's the name, what's their country, what's their style of working, like home office, or like all the details that you need to know to kind of get prepared. And that's a Google form, I think, that we use. So people ask that. So that's the first touch point. We'll figure out when the first date is that they will come on board. So we have a good deadline of like when we need to prepare everything. And from there on out, there's basically 2 main things that we prepare. There's one from my side, the manager, and one from the people's side. There's one big document, I think that's the heart of this whole onboarding process, which for us, that's, lives in paper and Dropbox paper, but whatever tool, like I know we always get the tool question, but the process here is more important. So whatever document system you use, that works fine. And in the document, we have a very detailed process of your, let's say, first 2 weeks. So there's a lot of like preamble of like, okay, if some gifts, welcome, those are the people that, are in your team and so on. There's another thing that I will mention in a second. And then it basically goes into each and every day, like, okay, day 1, that's the values day. So we'll give you some resources to read our values, get familiar with them, a couple of other tasks. Day 2 is about, transparency. Day 3 is about your home office. Day 4 is like, we go through various things so that by the end of week 2, you are, let's say, well prepared for the culture. But you're not alone on this journey, because what we've kept from the bootcamp, and I don't think it was related to the bootcamp, but what I think is the biggest, most important point about remote onboarding is our buddy system. So you get 3 people when you join that you will meet from day 1 on. One is, of course, the manager. So if I'm hiring someone, that would be me. And the other 2 people are your culture buddy and your role buddy. The culture buddy is basically a person, doesn't matter where they're from, in which team they are. Of course, they should maybe be close to your time zone if possible. But they will help you talk through anything that relates to the culture at the company. Like, how do I expense this? How do I communicate? Where do I put this? Where do I write this? So that person can help you with that. And then we have our role buddy. And the role buddy is basically someone ideally in the same role that can help you understand more about your job if you have questions. So that's basically the first 3 people. And I explain that always. So maybe some of the viewers here, they have been to networking events. And if you're a little bit more on the introverted scale and you go there alone, it's very awkward. You can't really, you're not really comfortable talking to people alone, and you have to interrupt people. So it's very awkward. But if you go there with a friend, it suddenly becomes easier. So that's what this kind of culture buddy system and role buddy system should help with, that from day 1 on, 2 people, and then, you can build up on that, and you have 2 people you can ask. So I think that's a very high level view of like having this process lined out of the first 2 weeks. By the way, those tasks that we have in there, like read this or chat to your culture buddy, they're like optional. You don't have to cross everything up. They're a guideline, okay? We don't enforce all of that, but they should give you a guideline of what, what's expected from you in the first 2 weeks. And then combined with that, our buddy system that I think is still very, very valuable.
So that sounds good. The 3 buddies is the role buddy, the culture buddy, and the
and
manager?
your manager, yeah, your lead, basically, yeah.
I see. So the whole onboarding process would last 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, well, I would call it more of a phase. The onboarding process probably takes a bit longer while you get, the hang of your role and everything. But I think the first 2 weeks, that's, I think, what the people team focuses on. They prepare all the tools, all the access, in front of it. I don't know any details, but we'll have a checklist there. I think someone else in the people team does that, a checklist where we go through all the tools that we need and what access they need that get filled out basically and checked off, so that, by day 1, that person has everything. That's kind of the people team side. From my side of things, there's then also another document that is linked in there, which is more like your role expectations, basically like a 30, 60, 90 idea things that, we expect you to do in, like, let's say, the first few months. So you've got an idea of where you can work towards to. And then I think there's no hard stop in like all of those things. Like after the 2 weeks, there's no hard stop. There's, of course, there are chats, I think, every 2 weeks with all the buddies together to see if there's anything we need to do to help that person. But there's no hard stop for that person. They just, continue to work, and all of those things kind of smoothly go over each other from like the first 2 weeks, learning all the different things, chatting to various people, then looking more into the role thing, and then kind of gradually going and focusing more on that.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm going to go ahead and go into the questions that we have. Tracy put in what tools do you use for onboarding? I think you discussed this.
The tool question, yeah. And I had this yesterday in another chat too. It's like the process is always much more important than the tools. There's probably some fancy tools that you can use out there. As far as I know, we don't use any very, very fancy tools. We use, the tools that the person will also use in their work. So they get familiar already, That's why the document where they get onboarded in and that they get sent to is in Dropbox Paper, because that's one part of where a lot of the work will happen for them, so they get already comfortable with what that is and what it looks like. So I would say try to make it work with what you have, and then just see if there's anything that you need, right? I don't think there's very many specific tools that you might need. It all depends on your culture. If you're a culture that is very synchronous communication heavy, very video heavy, maybe do a video and record that in Loom and put it in there, like it all depends. You need to make it work with your culture. So it needs to be flexible, and like what I just told you might work for us, but you with your culture might need to adjust a little bit, because your culture is not so asynchronous heavy, it's more synchronous heavy, more video calls. So I think it's important, whether that's the hiring process or the onboarding process, that they reflect what the person will do and how they will work further along the line.
Right, I agree. At the moment, though, Buffer is using, you mentioned you're using Google Form for the first part, right?
Yeah. So for like the initial take-in, there's a Google Form. We use Dropbox Paper a lot for all the documents that they get sent over. I don't know, maybe there's a Loom video here and there, maybe if we do new things, but most of also what the people team uses is either Notion, or Notion is like our wiki, which is basically more evergreen content, or in a list in Dropbox Paper where they check things off for that person. So it needs to be comfortable and doesn't add friction. It shouldn't add friction to your process.
See, so Carlos asked, do you meet face-to-face? How often? Once a year?
Yeah, so generally we see each other twice a year, like at least your team. So we have one big retreat where everyone in the company gets together. And then in the past few years, we did smaller retreats where just your own team was getting together. But last year we tried something where the product teams, the ones that need high collaboration, came together. So it was a bit more than just your team. So I would say that you see your teammates at least twice a year. And then if you travel more, if you go to conferences together, you of course see them more. But for the onboarding process, we don't see that person face to face, because we don't have an office, there's nowhere they could come. So that's all online.
Yeah, I agree. So Kaz is asking, for people who have not worked remotely before, do you have additional support or training for them?
I think a lot is we have a new onboarding, new hiring process where our hiring process is already happening in Slack, Paper, and on video calls. So you get already the tools that we need by going through the hiring process. And by the end of it, you'll probably know how to use them. So I don't know if that's kind of a training, but it's kind of subconsciously maybe a little bit. And then in our onboarding documents, we'll have a day where it's focused on your home office setup, which of course includes webcam, but also getting all the things ready to work productively. And then we have also a list of tools where they get invited to, and what they're for, and how we communicate. That's all in those first 14 days, where I think if you never, and we have those people, never work remotely, you will learn it through that. We have a lot of resources internally, so it's just a matter of putting them in those 14 days where people just experience that. And we know that person is new, so we're not very hard on that person, and also help. Whereas again, the culture buddy comes in, and that is basically the additional support for someone that hasn't worked remotely, they can ask hey, how do I do this? How do I communicate? How do I jump on a video call? How do I record this? Those are all questions that happen, and they probably are already in the document in a FAQ section where people just, can look at.
Right.
Does that answer it, Kaz? Feel free to just ask again.
Yeah. Another question that I have with the buddy system, the culture buddy, is that somebody that is randomly assigned to you, or do you have a person in Buffer who is the default culture buddy and he's assigned to the new person that comes into the team?
Yeah, we don't we don't want to have the same person all the time. That would be not cool for team cohesion. It's best if it changes. So I think once in a while we just ask a lot of people hey, do you want to be a culture buddy? And they end up in a list. So the people team has a list of people that are available. Of course, then we find out who's near to that person. We can't take someone who lives in India and take a culture buddy that lives in San Francisco. That wouldn't work, right? So you have to find someone that's close. And that's also a good person that can encapsulate your culture very well, right? So you don't have to force people to do that. They have to do it voluntarily because they need to be proactive to chat to that person.
Right, I agree. Couple more questions here from Tracy. Do you think certification in remote work are useful to buffer for those new to remote? Do you help people get hired? Do they help people get hired?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for us at Buffer, I just went through a hiring process myself with hiring an engineer, but we don't look at it. Like, we rarely do look at it. I think the certifications have their place, but more so for maybe bigger traditional companies where they don't have that trust yet or that infrastructure built for remote work. For companies like us, and I'm just speaking for Buffer, I don't know how other fully remote companies are doing it. We focus more on like the whole person and the whole fit in the team, right? There's culture fit, there's role fit, and how they are generally as a person. That's why our hiring process is quite long. So certification is something that I think relates more to hiring. And we personally at Buffer, we don't look at that. So just going back through my hiring process that I just did a few weeks ago, we haven't looked at that.
Okay. What difficulties do you feel with a full remote onboard process? Like, what are the challenges that you're facing?
I mean, it's a lot of technical things, probably getting everything set up right. Like even just right now with onboarding my engineer in India and the shutdown, and they don't have Apple stores and don't have the Apple online network there to deliver things. So how do we get a new laptop there? So I think the biggest issues or difficulties that you find with a full remote onboard process are related to logistics. How do we send them, a swag pack? How do we send them the laptop? How do we send them that? Because all the digital things and all the documents, like generally, if you're fully remote, you're already pretty good at documenting things. So you have all that information ready. So I think the biggest difficulties would probably be logistical.
Right. Okay. What tips do you have for hiring managers for online interviews?
What tips do you have for hiring managers just hiring managers online, like virtually, basically? That's the question, right?
Yeah, Kaz was the one who sent out.
Yeah, I don't understand the for online interviews, but I think it's like, what tips do you have for hiring managers like in a remote company? Yeah, management leadership is a very tricky thing. Hiring, like there can be good hires, there can be for the people interviewing. I mean, yeah, I'll try to answer. Let's see if that works. So
I can invite Kaz in. I think that would be. But yeah, you
sure.
can go ahead.
No, invite her in. Let's do it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Let's do it. Let me try to invite Kaz in. Sorry, Kaz, if you're not ready. Marcus talked me into it, but
well, if she's not, then it's cool too.
Yes, she. She's connecting. There we are. Cool. Hello.
Hiya, how's it going? Good. Calling from Ireland here. I was just looking from the hiring manager, so the person who's doing the interview. What tips would you have for them? Especially, we have a lot of clients now who have never done this before. They're suddenly in this situation, and they're looking for tips. And what questions should they be asking, or are there any tips you can give them? I suppose if you're used to it, you're doing it all the time.
Yeah. So I was involved in 2-3 sessions where we hired managers. I mean, it's similar to our whole onboarding process. So we have various calls, right? The first one is with the people team. Second one is kind of like a team fit team. Then there's like a culture fit team. And then there's an exercise that we do. Normally, you think that you would do that only with engineers or like individual contributors, but we do an exercise with managers. And I have to say that I was always the one who did the exercise with people, and it worked out pretty well. And the exercise is basically a text exercise where we have a situation that we describe to the person, to emails that you would get. And there's, of course, some uncertainty in there. You don't know what's happening, to people not really working well together. And then you give it to them and you tell them, okay, prepare notes, send it to us, and then we'll chat about this. So what you can do there is you test their written skills because you want their notes. So you see, do they just write one line of text? Do they write multiple things? What do they communicate with you as a peer? And then you also see them talk with you through it in the call. And I think that exercise can be very helpful if you hire remotely, because you get the sense of the person through the other calls, but then you can actually see what their skills are when it comes to leadership. So do they actually see everything? Are they just black and white and say, oh no, this is totally her fault because, like this is a gender biased issue, or no, this is like totally his or her fault, like you can actually see how they behave in such a situation. So that exercise has really worked well for us. So I don't even know if that's like a remote thing, but of course it helps for us being remote. So I would say maybe think about something like that. The questions that you can ask in general, I mean, they all have to be related to your culture and what you need from the manager. Do you need that person to be very straightforward? Then, you should ask a question related to that. Or, even open-ended questions sometimes are good in a sense of like, how would they solve a certain situation? How would they give feedback in such and such a situation? So I don't know where this video lands later on. Maybe I can send over some questions that we use. There's maybe also a blog post about that. But the question in general, make them work for your culture, and then try to see if you can do something more practical that you see the person in action at least a little bit.
Okay. All right.
Does that help you?
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. All right, well, let's move on. For a new hire, what's the timeline for them to get acquainted with the top management? Is it important for you, or is it part of your onboarding plan? Does everyone actually get interaction with the top management at some point? Question is from Katrina.
So top management meaning your own manager or like the executive team? Well, it depends on the hire. If it's like someone in exec team, okay. So if like the engineer now comes in my team, what would be the access to like the top management team? So that's a good question. I think so in the engineering perspective right now, our VP was involved in the call. She was the last call. And I think probably not from week 1 on, but later on then in the journey, we will do skip level one-on-ones. So that's something we do continuously, where the, VP of engineering chats with my direct reports like every 6 weeks or so. So that's one way that they get connected to them. And then in general, our exec team is they are not far away from us, so they are always where we are too. So it's very a familiar environment. So if, someone new comes on board, we'll put out a post of like, hey, we hired this new person. This is, their hobbies and that, this and that. And then everyone jumps in to congratulate with like a GIF or so. And there's no differentiation. It's not just ICs or not just managers or not just execs. It's just everyone. So we don't really differentiate there between that. And if they want to chat, like they can. If like, let's say they want to chat to Joel, they go through Mandy and they'll book a call with him. It's not that they're not allowed to, So even a good example was, so we made an offer to a person just last week or the week before. And the person wanted to hop on a call with me, had a lot of questions, good questions, and I posted them in our hiring channel. And Joel, our CEO, saw that and he said, hey, Marcus, you can use, my letter to the shareholders that I just, sent that explains, stuff to that question. So they're generally very involved. There's no timeline that we set, they have to get acquainted with them. They're there if you want to, and also in the other way around. Does that kind of answer the question? I hope so.
I hope so. Yes,
somewhat. If you want to ask a specific thing, like why it's important for you, then
I can invite Katrina in.
Sure.
And that might actually so at least she can verbalize exactly what she wants to ask on.
Let's do it.
Yes. All right.
I'll read the question again because there's so many in there.
I know, it's like I'm trying to do it one by one. Really good questions, though. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey.
No, I mean, I thank you for answering the question. It was just like, my question was, is it part of your plan? So if it's not part of the onboarding, eventually, if they have the guts to speak to the top management, then they will. But, again, people who work remotely sort of have a level of, they're quite shy sometimes. So I'm just asking, like, do you actually encourage them to meet with the top management, or do you have that embedded in your onboarding?
We do. So there's one thing, especially for Joel, we do town halls, and there's always a form that we have that we put in the onboarding where it's called a fears, uncertainties, and doubts form, where people just can share things, which will go directly to the exec team. That's one thing, but when you join, you rarely do have stuff, but we do put that in the onboarding. I think that connecting them in the onboarding, like straight away with the exec team, would feel a bit too far like away, because I think it's important for them to get to know their team, get too accustomed with all of the people that they work on, with me as their manager, and then of course they can be shy, and maybe there's someone who's really interested and Joel wants to chat to that person, or other way around. So stuff like that happens naturally, but as far as I remember, I don't want to give out false information, but as far as I remember, it's no direct point in our onboarding, because they wouldn't work with them day in, day out. Like they will be part, like for example, VP of Engineering Katie, they saw that person already, so they have a relationship already due to the hiring process. But like the Joel, the CEO, isn't like part of like, okay, day 2 chat with Joel. There's one thing that just comes to mind is that I think we did that for a while when we hired a lot of people in batches. We did like a buffer history story session with Joel. So Joel got all the newbies kind of in and talked about the history. But as we hire like quite sparsely, like we don't do that as much anymore. But I don't want to say something false, but I would say that it's not directly part of the onboarding, but there's various points where you probably can if you want to.
Understand. And just trying to check, because like some small companies, they do that, or like companies who are in an office setup, they try and do that for onboarding, especially again in batches. So just wondering if in a remote setup, would that actually be more helpful for people in terms of getting acquainted with the team, getting more involved with the company? Some companies probably like Buffer, your CEOs are just much better in really getting, in there with everyone. So it's also probably a difference in management.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like your onboarding process will have to reflect what your culture is. So it also depends on the size of your company. If you have a size of 10 people where your top management is basically your manager, then it's basically the same relationship as it is with me and the engineer right now. Then they would, if it's like a small team and the exec top managed team is your next manager, then I would always encourage that they chat weekly, but it depends on the size of the team there.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Ciao.
All right. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Thank you for answering. ThinkClap, what is the biggest challenge you face with onboarding remotely now? I think Maria has a couple of questions. I hope she doesn't mind if I bring her in, so you can answer it both.
I think one I already answered. I don't know. I'll wait for her. I don't know if she will.
Yes. Yeah.
Answer or not.
And we can verify. There we go. She's joining in. Hi, Maria.
How are you doing?
Good. Yeah.
Good. Thanks. So my question, just I'm a HR head. I suppose that's my background and where I'm coming from. And I'm just wondering, what's the biggest challenge you face right now? It seems like you've been doing onboarding for years. You're well used to it. And I'm just wondering, what's your key challenge right now?
I think, as I mentioned, I think there was a question up ahead with like face-to-face. I think the biggest is logistics, having a team distributed across the world. I saw a question somewhere around, also legal stuff, because we don't have an entity in all the countries, how that will work for each individual. And then, sending them all the things they need to do. If they can't order a MacBook Pro on their own, how do we get it to them? So I think, from my perspective right now, seeing it like with the person I'm onboarding right now, it's mostly logistics, because the questions and how we work, they will get a lot through that already in the hiring process, and they are excited to join. So for us, it's not really the problem of like getting them in. It's more like how we'll figure out all the logistics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And then what would you say, and this is a follow-on question, I suppose, I've later, what do you see as the key pitfalls in onboarding remotely, based on your experience now that you're doing it, a long time, for us newbies on the scene?
Yeah, I think it's the same as if someone would work already remotely and you have them on a team, is helping them to get connected to the team. They're new. That's why we have the buddy system, and helping them build those relationships that they don't like. Loneliness is already a problem in remote work. So when you come into a new team, right, you don't want that. So helping them stay connected, reaching out to them, being very proactive in the first few months. If you start to lose that, then you can probably lose the person in a way or so too. So I think it's important for everyone involved in that team, that person gets hired in, as you as the manager or the buddies, that you'll be proactive in reaching out and asking like, hey, how's it going? And let's jump on a video call. Do you have everything you need? Do you have your home office? Like, what's the challenge right now? So there's a lot of that proactiveness that you have to have when it comes to like the first few weeks, months.
Sure. And how active a role does HR play in all of this in your business? So a lot of it is between the manager and the employee.
Yeah, no, the people team is involved there. We call it people team, but it's basically the same. They are very involved right now, like preparing everything, communicating with the person. And then when they come on and they do check-ins also, like it doesn't matter if it's just them or just me, but it's, even better if it's both of them. So they will do check-ins, and I think they are mostly involved for, let's say, the first, 2 months, probably 2 to maybe 3 months. I don't know, but that's where they're involved. That's where I mentioned it before, we do every 2-3 weeks a meeting with the two buddies, the manager and someone from the people team, just to check in if there's something they need, right? So they are watching out for what's going on, and they're also in contact with me as the manager to see like how it's going from our side of the thing, right? Not just from the individual person, do they work well in, but also from our perspective, like, hey, do they fit in? Is everything going well?
Cool. One last question before I leave you go.
Go for it.
So, again, this is your journey and your experience of onboarding remotely. And what has been the thing that you've changed most, I suppose, since starting this onboarding program in your business?
I think the one thing I mentioned at the beginning is the name, just not calling it boot camp and making it something military. I think that was the biggest change. But also, I think similar to how your company works, and that's what I always say about remote work, is be flexible. Our document hasn't been the same. It's always evolving. We're always maybe trying a new tool that we didn't have 2 years ago, right? So we have to build it in there. So I think that's what your document, like let's say your main thing, has to reflect. So that's, I think, the biggest change, but this is a continuous change. This will change, as we go along and try new things, different team setup, or maybe, we have a different form or different thing. So it's more of a continuous change than, this just had changed 2 years ago and that's it,
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And nice to speak with you. Okay.
Same.
Bye. All right. I'm going to bring in Tracy because she has a couple of questions. Actually, Tracy, I also wanted to ask this. Her question is, how fast do you fire if you see an issue on the onboarding, which is more or less similar with the question that I had, like culture fit is quite difficult to attain when working remotely. Have you ever had an employee that went through onboarding and suddenly realized that they're not a good fit? So I think that to put it simply,
I don't think
okay, the connection is not
okay.
Okay, right, yeah.
No worries. I don't think we ever had that case, because I think we do put a lot of value into our hiring process and do a lot of, like, even now we started the Android engineering hiring in January, and we went through, multiple batches because we want to find the right person. So we do tend to test and try a lot and figure out a lot in the hiring process so that doesn't happen, because that's not a nice experience. May happen that, a year later it happens. That can be because, the first period is always exciting. So I think, to answer the question, actually very slow, like in a sense that we always would try to make it work, and figure out what the problem is and work on that. We wouldn't just say, oh, hey, you sent the wrong email, we'll fire you, in a sense like that, So we'll always try to work with the person, because as soon as we make them an offer, we really want to hire and work with them. we always
Right.
say, like, oh, we want to hack yes, in a sense. How many CVs?
Yeah. Would
You
you
mean
get per job?
applicants?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. How many?
So for my role that we just hired, and I think it's like a general number, we got between 400 and 500 or something like that. So it's a lot to go through.
Right. How many?
I think ours was 400, a little bit over 400, so something between 400 or 500 maybe.
How long did you had the position open?
I think 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
But we started like looking at CVs already in the middle, like after 2 weeks or so to stopped kind of filtering.
Is this the average amount of CVs that you get per application?
I'm not involved in all of them. I think it depends on the
Right.
role. Like engineering role is quite popular, so that gets a lot. We had a product manager role. I think it was also above 300. The management roles maybe get above 200, if I remember correctly, or 100. But it's let's say three numbers of
right.
Yeah.
In the hundreds.
Yeah, the hundreds, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
Right. This question I had, work relationships are tricky with people whom you've never met physically. How do you build the bond with the team when someone new comes in? I think you've answered it with the buddy system.
That helps,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And also our culture being very welcoming, having very, like, we all suffer from not having, a person in front of us. So it's not that the person that joins is new to all of that problem. It's like the whole company has to work on it. So they already come into something that we're working on. We have pair calls or icebreaker chats and, like casual hangouts and stuff like that. So that helps with that. And having the culture buddy is a big, big plus there because they can show you the ropes a little bit.
Right. Do you consider having remote work experience in the past as an advantage? Do you consider this when you're hiring people?
No, what we do is sometimes, I did that in the last role, I asked them, how they work currently, but more so to figure out how they would cope with certain situations and how they would communicate. And we had people that say, oh yeah, I prefer having, someone next to me in an interview, which might not be a blocker, but it shows you what they value. And you can already maybe see that they could struggle with something like that, So it at least gives you, I wouldn't say it's a no when you hear that, but it's more so like a precaution you can take for that person even,
Right. Okay. So two more questions. How do you manage the admin hiring people in multiple countries, payroll, benefits, employment law? I guess it's not such as onboarding, but more on the hiring.
More legal side of things, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, I don't want to talk about too much because it's not my expertise. We have an entity in the UK and the US, and we have PEOs in other countries, and some are still contractors. Not ideal situations, but there's companies that do solve that problem, like remote.com or Boundless HQ.
Yeah.
So I think those are starting to come up more and will help with all of that to solve that question.
Yeah, I agree. For the interviewee's perspective, any tips? We are a flexible recruitment agency and we coach our candidates for remote interviews. Interested to know your do's and don'ts.
Oh, wait a second. That was too fast. Can I read that?
Sorry, yes.
No.
From the interviewee's perspective,
okay.
Right? So from the recruiter's part, any tips? We are a flexible recruitment agency and we coach our candidates for remote interviews. Interested to know your do's and don'ts.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's hard to answer just on the spot. I think what I always say to people is just be yourself. Don't try to be, but that's in general, I think, for any hiring or interviewing good. Just be yourself and demonstrate your culture and how you fit into that company. So especially for Buffer, transparency is kind of a big thing for us. So being very transparent, even vulnerable and kind, just mirroring what you see is generally a good practice. That if I see someone do that, I appreciate that very much. If they behave in a similar way, how we are behaving in a sense, and they are excited, like if I see someone that isn't excited, like you can sense that, So yeah, it's hard to answer.
I guess because it's it's a very broad spectrum as well. It depends on the position that you're applying for, and all of, mostly for me personally, because we do the coaching and mentoring for candidates, is that if you plan to apply to a specific company, let's say Buffer, try to do some research on them, like look them up, like how do they communicate, how, like they will give you telltales, they will give you some signs, how do they work and how they communicate to the public, and most likely that's going to be how they communicate internally, and how you can represent them if you get hired. Like assume the role as if you're hired, as if you are part of Buffer, so that when you come up and talk to the recruiter, they would see the similarities, or they would feel that. So yeah. All right, I'm going to put that as done. Question from Katrina: do you provide training for your culture buddies? Do you provide a guide, and do they initiate reaching out to the new hires?
So let me see. Do you provide? There's no proper training. Like being a culture buddy means basically just being who you are in Buffer, and this, telling them how you would do things. So your training has been basically your whole employment at Buffer. We do have, I think, a guide where we talk them through various things, and especially about the thing you say, like being proactive in reaching out. I mentioned that with, I think, Kaz. So being proactive there and reaching out is definitely a big plus. And that's also stated in that, like, one little document we have.
I see. So for me, do I volunteer to become a culture buddy? Let's just say
Sure.
in Portugal, there's like, I don't know, 5 Buffer employees here. And I would say like, I want to be, a culture buddy for the new hire. Or do you randomly assign that to people? How does that?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before. We have like a group, and you can volunteer. You mostly volunteer. And then
all right,
they get mapped to, like, do they fit? Are they in a similar time zone, and maybe not in the same team, to like diversify that a little bit. So you can volunteer 100%. It mostly is volunteers.
Right. So what's been your biggest learning onboarding remotely from your experience?
What's your biggest learning?
Tough questions.
Yeah, because I don't know if I can relate it to onboarding, but just general remote, in a sense that, even more so in the onboarding, it's so important to get those people connected. And I think the biggest learning for me personally, having, been at Buffer and done that, the culture buddy and role buddy, like the buddy system, does really work very, very well. And I think that would be my biggest learning that I would take away to the future.
Right. Because I think one of the most challenging things to implement in a company when you go remote is the culture. And it starts from the very beginning of when the company was still starting out, when there was just 2 or 3 people, and you build it from there. And then the next person who will come has to know what the culture is like. I guess that that would be a good question. I guess that would be a good question. Like, how did they, like, was it like similar to GitLab, wherein they had this handbook and they started out with just a few pages and they build and build and build, and like, what were the pillars of the culture of Buffer when you first get in? What
Those
are
things here?
Yeah, I see.
The values, I think they are what started out what Buffer's handbook is, in a sense. They were basically created when there was, I think, 8, 9, or 10 people in the beginning. They all created them together, and so the culture, the hiring process, the onboarding process, most of them are based on those. So we don't just put them on our walls. We try to live them.
I see. So those things in the background are the values of Buffer.
Those over here, there's 6 right now. We had 10, but they changed. Just default to transparency, show gratitude, practice reflection, improve consistently, act beyond yourself, and cultivate positivity. They are also online if you want to see them.
Right.
I think buffer.com/values might even work. So I don't want to say something, but it should work.
Right. If you have the link, you can send it in. A couple more questions here. Do you put culture buddies through a training program? I think Kat also asked this. I'm guessing what makes it work.
What makes it work? Is that related to maybe the next question also, where the person's asking if, like, how do you know it's working, or at least if it worked for that new hire? Well,
yeah.
As there are multiple people and also the people team involved, the people team, they are asking them like, hey, how is it going? Are you chatting? Even when was that? Last year when I was a role buddy for someone, my manager asked me like, hey, did you chat to, the new hire? And I said, no, we didn't. So let's put it on the calendar, So there's various people involved. It's not just one person. So they each check in on each other to see, how it's going. And then the people team at the end, I think after a certain period, which I can't tell you right now what it is, they also do like another survey or so to check in like how it worked, what they especially liked. So there's definitely a process behind that, which I also don't want to say something stupid, but there's a very good article about onboarding in general too. I'll look for that right now while I'm talking and send you the link.
Right. Yeah. If it's already written and all in one page, that makes things easier.
We do have so much written that's always easy for me to say. So we have actually the evolution of onboarding at Buffer, which you can all read and hopefully not find any mistakes that I told you today.
Right.
But again, it's a living process.
Right. It's basically, be ready to iterate and update and adapt to how it's changing.
Yeah. So you can also see if you scroll down, there's like we have various the little guides that I told you about the culture buddy, and so in Notion, that's written there what you do, so you can check out what has been written down. You also see an excerpt of what I meant with like the first 14 days. There's like one day which shows you various tasks.
Right.
So that's written by one of our people person teams. So check that out.
Pretty legit. Okay, so yes. The question I have, I didn't write it down, but is it part of your onboarding to inform people, like let's just say Tracy already asked this, like if you are not a fit, if there's something wrong, how is the process of like I wouldn't say getting rid of somebody, but like reprimanding them, like if they, if you're not fit with the culture, and it's fortunate that it hasn't happened yet, but if it does happen, do you have a process of reprimanding people, giving feedback, and then like ultimately firing somebody?
Of course, I wouldn't say though that is related to the onboarding. This is general like culture thing of like we have a feedback process. Feedback can be positive, can be correcting. Correcting is the first thing that happens. You can get multiple corrections. Then there's a warning. Like there's certain things that are built into this process because in certain countries they also have to be legal, so they have to be following a certain scheme. So we do have a whole process on that, but I think that would go too far. So we have a process, and ultimately the end of that process would be being fired. Of course.
Right. So is this something that you introduced during the onboarding, or no? Is this is something you only introduce when stuff happens?
No, there is a step in there that explains how to give feedback. It depends if you're a manager, if I see it. It shows it from various perspectives. So we have something that is for leads, for managers, that's more detailed, not more detailed, but explains it. And then there's for others, also, hey, how to give feedback to peers and all of that. So we do have that as a resource, of course.
Right. Maria asked, do you have a standard 1-day onboarding for everyone, or how long is that standard onboarding?
What's the standard onboarding? So it's not just 1 day. It's like we decide on a day where they start. Before that, we set up all the accounts, and on that day they get the document, and then like their time at Buffer starts. Is that what she's asking? Do you have a standard 1-day onboarding for everyone, or how long? I think the standard period that we normally use more loosely is like the 30, 60, 90 for like the role specific things.
Right.
The onboarding document, as I explained, the very detailed tasks are mostly, I think, 14 days. And you can, as a manager, if you want to be like very detailed and write it up for the 90 days, like you can do that. But it's more easier to say, okay, until the 90, until the 60. That's the expectations.
Okay.
Most traditional offices have a basic onboarding day. Yeah, but as we're not an office, we can't, and everyone is a different time zone, you know, so we have to, like our people team lead that does all the onboarding. She's away from me 9 hours, and the person we are hiring is in India. It's 3.5 hours. So they have actually over 12 hours difference. So it would be very tricky to do the traditional office onboarding.
Right. Yeah. You just basically do like the list of things that you need to do today and the list of people that you need to meet during this period of time.
Yes.
Right?
So when they come online, for example, on the first day, I will not be there for the first 4 hours. So it's important that they know there's other people in that time zone they can reach out to.
All right. Now you mentioned about logistics. So I'm wondering is you send them the tools that they need, like the laptop and the swag pack and whatnot. So their day one starts as soon as they receive the package, or they can go ahead and start using their own devices when they got hired, or what does that look like?
Well, ideally they would start with our stuff, but logistics are never easy, especially in a time like this right now. So if they have something they can work on, you know, they can start. It's their decision. If they don't have anything because they had to give it, you know, to their last job, then of course you have to have kind of a laptop to start working. So then it kind of has to be related to when at least your laptop arrives, you know. So that's why I mentioned logistics is a bit difficult, especially in times like right now. Is that answering your question? Sorry, I was.
Yes, it does. It does. I actually wasn't even thinking like, you know, if you don't have a laptop and because you need to send it back to the old employer. Actually, that does make a lot of sense, because my previous job, I was also given a laptop by the employer, but because I work with them for X amount of years, I don't have to send it back. But if I imagine I work with them, if I will only work with them for a year or so, I need to send it back, and that would mean
so
I would.
At Buffer, you keep the laptop, so it's yours then. But first you have to get it if you don't have one.
Yes, that is true. Okay, we are down to our last 8 minutes, and a lot of questions answered, which is amazing, right? We don't have any more questions to answer unless we have other people. Okay, I'm just reviewing the list just to make sure we didn't miss anything. But yeah, to close, I guess we can go ahead and close the session. Unless
I feel exhausted right now.
But you did amazing, and it was very, very informative, and like this is what I like about these sessions, because we talk about one specific topic, you know, and you kind of, you know, unpack it, because there's so many things involved in them, and we tend to forget that this little details actually matters a whole lot, and the devil is in the details.
Totally, yeah.
Like, just, you know, having a laptop sent to you is already a big deal.
It is, if you are globally distributed, Yeah,
exactly. Oh, yeah. What was I think it was First Base, the company that does remote.com is resolving the problem when it comes to hiring with the legal stuff, you know, with the contracts and benefits and whatnot. But I think First Base is also trying to resolve this problem that you have with the logistics. Because you can go ahead and order the tools that, you know, it's like ordering an office online and shipping it to that person. And it kind of resolves the problem of like, oh, is there an Apple store nearby their place? Like, how do we pick up the things? It doesn't, you know, you don't have to think of this. You just order everything in one, even the desk and the, you know, the chair and the mouse pad, everything, all in one place, and you just ship it to that person, which is so convenient.
I think it makes sense if you hire a lot. Yeah, we're currently hiring not too much, so, you know, like it wouldn't be too big of an effort for us to do it. And also when it comes to like smaller things that you need, we always want the person to like decide on what works best for them. So I don't know how that would work with that tool. I don't know it. So just wanted to add. at that.
That's true too. So Marcus, I would like to give you the opportunity to invite people to add you, to your blog, to your LinkedIn. If there's any other questions that they might have later on, how can they reach you?
Yeah. So if you go to my website, which is just my name, marcuswermuth.com, you can find all the links. I'm on Twitter. I'm Wermuth. Also on LinkedIn, if you type in my name, you should find me. If you want to connect with me there, feel free to. I'm always happy. I'm trying to be active on there. I'm also trying to finish a book, which is kind of a big challenge. It's not about onboarding. It's about more managing and building relationships in a remote team. But yeah, if you follow me, you'll probably get a notice when that will happen. I won't give dates because it's difficult.
Right, exactly. Like, is there a landing page we can sign up?
Not yet, no. I think I have a newsletter, which you can go to my website, which is also not too active. Like I still have to work. But
right.
I do post a lot on my blog, or at least like bigger pieces on there that will be part. So if you want to kind of read in there a little bit, you can do that there too.
Okay. When is the next event that you will be on?
I don't know. I have to maybe take a little pause. The past few weeks have been a bit stressful. There might be something next week, but I think after that it quiets down a little bit.
Right. I know there's been a lot of events, remote working events recently, which is great because people have been talking about, this for a long time, and now it's becoming mainstream. So anyways, I think we are closing shop. Thank you so much for everybody who came and asked questions. Marcus, thank you so much for dedicating some time for us. We really appreciate it. Grow Remote is 100% volunteer powered, and we really appreciate you giving time
for sure
to help us as well.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you guys.
Awesome.
The recording, yes, the recording will be available momentarily. Bye. Bye.
Bye.